Hello and welcome to The Crime Reel. Firstly, I would like to say a big thank you to everyone for sharing, liking, commenting and telling their friends about our channel. I definitely saw a spike in subs and comments and it has nudged us even closer to that elusive 100,000. It really is very greatly appreciated. I enjoyed reading through all the comments and opinions on last week's video discussing whether it is ever acceptable to turn true crime into a comedy film. There was a range of differing opinions. Renee Catagnas stated that a murder victim should never be ridiculed and a killer should not be a victim. A comedy out of a real-life murder is disturbing. And at the other end of the scale, Key Imaginations comments that everything shall turn into a comedy with time, or we are living in a hell of a mind. Humour is the best tool to make the unthinkable bearable. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen and comment. If you haven't seen the video yet, and want to add your thoughts, I would love to hear them. I will include a link to that video at the end of today's narration. There are so many strong opinions on the subject of crime and punishment, and I find it fascinating debating these topics. With that in mind, I've again added a question at the end of this week's video, and would love it if you could include your opinions in the comment section below. So, on to today's crime. Roger Dale Stafford was born on the 4th of November 1951 in Sheffield, Alabama. He was one of 10 children born to Carrie and Samuel Stafford. His brother, Harold, was a year older than him, and little is known of their childhood. Of the two sources which I have found, one stated that the boys, together with their siblings, had a good upbringing in a good, solid family, whilst the other mentions that Roger was physically abused as a child. It is believed that at some point Roger joined the US Army and served in the Vietnam War. Roger married Verna and they had 3 children together, a son, also named Roger, and 2 daughters, Victoria and Candy. These children were placed with adoptive parents in Illinois, although it is unclear exactly when this happened. Jimmy Earl Berry was born in Collinwood, Tennessee on the 17th of November 1953, making him 2 years younger than Roger. Jimmy's family struggled for money, and by the age of 20 he was working as an assistant manager at a McDonald's restaurant to help support his mother and siblings, whilst also being a student at Florence State University, which is now known as the University of North Alabama. He was an intelligent, funny and charming young man who had begun dating a young woman who had left her high school sweetheart to be with him. Prior to the around-the-clock openings that we are so accustomed to today, back in January 1974, the McDonald's restaurant on Woodward Avenue in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, closed at midnight. In the early hours of the 12th of January 1974, 3 employees checked out of their shift, leaving Jimmy alone to finish closing up. Around 3 a.m. that morning, the cleaner arrived at the restaurant and was concerned when they found the side door open with the key still in the lock. As they entered the building, they saw that the safe was open and immediately called the police. Sergeant Roger Hall arrived just minutes later and when checking the premises found Jimmy's body in a storeroom. Jimmy had been shot 3 times in the abdomen and once in the back, with this bullet travelling upwards and piercing his heart. Around $1,400 had been stolen from the restaurant, and the investigators determined that around half of that amount would have been in rolled coins weighing in excess of 80 pounds. A murder investigation was launched and Jimmy was buried in Sheffield's Oakwood Cemetery. A reward was offered for information leading to an arrest, and as time passed this was increased to $10,000 as local businesses contributed in an attempt to catch Jimmy's killer. Months turned into years without a break in the case. Suspicion fell on Jimmy's girlfriend's former boyfriend, the son of a well-known Colbert County businessman who had allegedly vowed to win back his girlfriend no matter the cost. There was no evidence to link him to the murder, and yet the cloud of suspicion remained. 4 years later, another shooting occurred, this time near Purcell in Oklahoma. On the 22nd of June 1978, 38-year-old Air Force technician Melvin Lorenz was traveling from his home in San Antonio to Jamestown, North Dakota, to attend his mother's funeral. Together with his wife, Staff Sergeant Linda, 12-year-old son Richard, and their 2 dogs, they headed along Interstate 35 in their blue pickup truck, which had a white camper shell. At around 3 o'clock in the morning, they saw a woman at the side of the road. The bonnet on her car was raised, and it appeared as though she had broken down. The Lorenz family pulled over to help, and when Melvin approached the woman, 2 men who had been hiding behind the car sprung out and demanded Melvin's money. When he didn't immediately comply, they shot him dead. Linda ran from the car to help her husband and was knocked down by the woman before also being shot. The shooter then heard a noise from the pickup truck and realised that 12-year-old Richard was inside. They raised the gun through the window and shot the young boy. Leaving Melvin and Linda's bodies at the side of the road, the killers then drove the truck a short distance with young Richard still in the back, possibly alive at this point, before dumping him out of the truck. They made off with just $600. Melvin and Linda's bodies were discovered later that day, and Richard was declared missing. His body was found 2 days later, less than a mile from where his parents had been found. On the 26th of June, the family's pickup truck was found in the car park of the Sheraton Inn near Will Rogers World Airport in Oklahoma. The family's 2 dogs had clawed their way out of the camper shell. Melvin's gun was missing from their vehicle, and the police began working on the theory that the killers had flown out of the city. The investigation continued but stalled. 3 weeks after the murder of the Lorenz family, a young man by the name of Carlos Joy arrived at the Sirloin Stockade restaurant in Oklahoma City to collect his girlfriend, Terry Horst, at the end of her shift. She popped out to see him, gave him a soft drink, and asked him to wait in the car. As Carlos drove around the car park, he saw a dirty green station wagon with its engine running at the rear of the restaurant. After waiting a while longer, he decided to go inside to see what was taking Terry so long. He called out her name, but no one answered. He assumed that the staff were finishing up in the office and returned to his car. However, as the time passed, he became increasingly worried. In his car, he had a CB radio, or Citizens Band radio, which was attached to a loudspeaker, and through the microphone he said, "The building is surrounded. This is the police." Little did he know that 2 men and a woman were inside, having robbed the restaurant. They made their escape in the green car, heading to Interstate 240, where they collided with another car before driving away. At around the same time, the restaurant's manager started to become concerned that his assistant at the restaurant hadn't phoned in the receipts to the district office. The manager decided to visit the restaurant to check that everything was okay. When he arrived, he discovered that all 6 employees were in the walk-in freezer. All of them had been shot. 5 of them were already dead. 17-year-old David Lindsay was a young man who was originally from Los Angeles. He had 2 brothers, attended Moore High School and the Pentecostal Holiness Church, and was active in Little League. David Salzman was 15 years old. He had 1 brother and was originally from Kentucky. 16-year-old Anthony, too, was a resident of Cape Charles and was living in Oklahoma for the summer. 43-year-old Louis Zacharias was the assistant manager of the restaurant and a married father of 4 teenage girls, and 56-year-old Isaac Freeman was a pastor who had been helping out at the restaurant by filling in for a night shift cleaner. Carlos also returned to the restaurant and saw his girlfriend, Terry, in amongst the jumble of bodies in the freezer. Terry was still alive and rushed to the nearby Children's Memorial Hospital, but died an hour later. She had been a member of the Moore High School State Championship girls basketball team and the First Methodist Church of Moore. She had 2 sisters and was just 15 years old at the time of her death. The criminals escaped with less than $1,300. The authorities were soon working on the theory that 3 people were involved in the murder at the steakhouse. two of whom were the shooters. As the investigation progressed, the police began examining links between the Steakhouse murders and the Lorenz family murders. By early September, the link between the two crimes was proven when two guns and a holster were found in a paper bag by a young child in Oklahoma City. One was a .38 caliber Taurus that had been stolen from a Purcell pawn shop on June 21st and used to kill both the Lorenz family and also in the shootings at the Steakhouse. The other was a .357 Magnum, which was stolen from the Lorenz's car and used in the Steakhouse murders. As more details of the two crimes were made public, a man came forward who recalled seeing a truck matching the Lorenz's at a petrol station in Stillwater on the night of their murders. He remembered two men and a woman and was able to provide composite sketches of them. They had stuck in his mind as he recalled that they seemed peculiar. In early January 1979, the composite sketches were released. At this point, the police did not have any suspects in any of the murders. However, the following day they received a tip which would unravel the entire case. Roger Dale Stafford called them and identified two of the people in the composite sketches as his wife Verna and his late brother Harold. Harold had been killed in a motorbike accident in Tulsa 6 days after the shooting at the Steakhouse. It has been rumoured, but not confirmed, that he may have taken his own life. Meanwhile, Verna had had a massive falling out with her husband, which led to him downing 2 bottles of whiskey before making the call to the police to disclose her identity. It would take a couple more months before Verna was tracked down in Chicago and arrested, at which point Roger was also identified as the third person in the composite sketches. He was arrested on the 13th of March 1979 in the lobby of the YMCA in Chicago. Verna bargained with the authorities and confessed to her involvement in the Lorenz and Steakhouse shootings, as well as providing details of many other crimes that Roger had been involved in during their time together. This included the murder of Jimmy Earl Berry. The police in Muscle Shoals officially issued a warrant for his arrest, but he was never prosecuted for this crime. He was, however, prosecuted for the Lorenz family murders and the 6 deaths at the Steakhouse. Verna testified against Roger and as part of her deal pleaded guilty to 2 second-degree murder charges and, in March 1980, was sentenced to 10 years to life in prison. At the first trial for the Steakhouse murders, Verna claimed that Roger was the one who had herded the employees into the walk-in freezer and had then called his brother, Harold, a coward to goad Howard into helping with the killings. Verna also claimed that Roger had forced her hand onto the gun and made her squeeze the trigger. Meanwhile, Roger denied any involvement in the crime. On the 17th of October 1979, he was convicted of all 6 murders and sentenced to death. In February 1980, Roger went on trial for killing Melvin, Linda, and Richard Lorenz. His attorney attempted to minimise his role in the murders, accusing Verna of trying to pin the crimes onto her estranged husband. However, the jury again found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death for all 3 murders. After the verdicts were read out, he grinned, waved, and said bye-bye to 2 of his supporters, as though he did not have a care in the world. Verna and Roger divorced whilst he was on death row. Roger was initially scheduled to be executed in 1980, but many stays of execution followed, including one just 15 hours before the time that his execution was due. In 1986, while still on death row, Roger remarried. His new wife, Christine Romack, sought an annulment less than a year later after claiming that Roger had falsely convinced her that he would be a free man within 9 months. Then, in 1988, he married for the 3rd time. With the groom dressed in chains, the newlyweds were granted a 3-hour non-contact visit to celebrate their nuptials. In August 1989, having served almost 10 years of her sentence, Verna hoped to be released after a resentencing hearing. This certainly did not go according to her plan. An Oklahoma County District Judge resentenced her to 2 consecutive life terms after prosecutors told them that Werner had known in advance that the Lorenz family were going to be killed and that she had played a much more active role in the crime than she had previously admitted. The judge concluded by saying that there's one of the hottest corners of hell vacant with your name above it. After spending over 15 years on death row, firmly believing that his death sentence would never be fulfilled, Roger was executed by lethal injection on the 1st of July 1995. In his final moments, he reportedly spoke in tongues to his 3rd wife. Roger never officially acknowledged his guilt, but Werner implicated him in a total of 34 murders in 7 different states. It is believed that he may have confessed to many of these to his fellow inmates. With information that detectives have pieced together, they believe that he was involved in at least 22 other murders and may have been responsible for many more, potentially even as far away as England. Werner remains incarcerated at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma, whilst Harold is buried in an unmarked grave in Alabama. Whilst Roger was never convicted of Jimmy's murder, the reward money which had been offered to solve the crime was given to Jimmy's mother after Roger's arrest. That concludes today's story about Roger Dale Stafford. He was convicted of 9 brutal murders and was potentially responsible for many more heinous crimes and paid for these with his life. He spent over 15 years on death row, waiting out the results of various appeals and legal procedures, and during this time he married not once but twice. This got me thinking and debating with my fellow true crimers. Should any prisoner, whether they on death row or otherwise, be allowed to marry during their time serving their sentence? Is this a human right which should be extended to all regardless of their criminal status? Or should they lose the ability to marry at the same time as they lose their freedom? I'd love to hear all your thoughts and comments below. I genuinely find these sort of discussions absolutely fascinating. Please kindly subscribe if you're new to the channel. Also, special thanks to Rob Lynn 2020 for suggesting covering this case a while back. Thank you for listening to The Crime Reel. Stay safe. Goodbye. Psst. In Sheffield, Alabama, there is a famous recording studio called Muscle Shoals Sound Studio. Over the years, they've had many stars record there, such as Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, Joe Cocker, and the Rolling Stones. Goodbye.